Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. In the opening moments, viewers are immersed in a powerful visual montage, black and white footage of Parliament Hill, photographs of 5 determined women, and bustling scenes from 1920s Canada. A voiceover poses a profound question: what does it mean to be a person? This question, while seemingly simple today, once stood at the heart of a legal and moral battle that would redefine citizenship and justice in Canada. In 1929, 5 courageous women set out to challenge a legal system that refused to recognize them as full persons under the law. Their fight wasn't just for themselves, but for generations of women to come. This video explores their journey, how 5 ordinary citizens became extraordinary changemakers. We begin by meeting the women who would become known as the Famous Five. Each brought her own background, expertise, and vision to the movement. Emily Murphy was a trailblazer as the first female magistrate in the British Empire, constantly battling a system that questioned her right to judge male defendants. Henrietta Muir Edwards, a quiet but formidable legal mind, focused on the rights of working-class women and published key legal texts outlining their limited protections. Nellie McClung, perhaps the most flamboyant of the 5, was a powerful suffragist and orator who used satire and drama to expose gender inequality. Louise McKinney was a devout Christian and former prohibitionist who became the first woman elected to a legislature in the British Empire. Irene Parlby, representing Alberta's rural women, pushed for maternal health and farm women's rights and later served as a cabinet minister. Though different in personality and approach, these 5 women were united by a common goal: to dismantle the structural barriers that held women back. To understand the significance of their fight, we need to look at the status of women in Canada in the early 20th century. Although women had recently achieved the right to vote in federal elections, they were still largely excluded from real political power. The British North America Act, Canada's founding constitutional document, made no mention of women as persons in the legal sense. This meant they could not be appointed to the Senate, a critical body for shaping national legislation. Patriarchy was deeply embedded in Canadian law and politics. Most public institutions were governed by men, for men. Women could influence decisions only indirectly, and even those influences were tightly restricted by social norms that framed women as moral guardians rather than political actors. The campaign that would become known as the Person's Case began with a rejection. Emily Murphy was nominated for a Senate seat, but her application was dismissed on the grounds that women were not legally persons. Outraged, she joined forces with Edwards, McClung, McKinney, and Parlby to challenge the ruling. Together, they petitioned the federal government to ask the Supreme Court of Canada whether women qualified as persons under Section 24 of the BNA Act. In 1928, the Supreme Court responded with a resounding no: women were not persons in the legal context intended by the Act. But the Famous Five didn't stop there. They took their case to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in Britain, then Canada's highest court of appeal. On October 18, 1929, the Privy Council overturned the Supreme Court's decision, famously declaring that the exclusion of women from all public offices is a relic of a bygone era. It was a monumental moment. From that day forward, Canadian women were legally recognized as persons, eligible to serve in the Senate and other political offices. The effects of this victory were immediate and symbolic. Women could now participate fully in Canada's parliamentary democracy. Although Emily Murphy herself was never appointed to the Senate, others would follow in her footsteps, breaking barriers in public office. More broadly, the case set a powerful legal precedent. It demonstrated that constitutional language could evolve with time and that interpretation could be challenged. The Person's Case became a touchstone in Canadian legal history and a symbol of hope in subsequent struggles for human rights. Statues of the Famous Five now stand on Parliament Hill, a tribute to their impact and legacy. For many, they represent resilience, determination, and the power of collective action. The legacy of the Famous Five is one of the most celebrated milestones in Canada's fight for women's rights, but like many historical narratives, it is layered with both triumph and troubling contradictions. While these 5 women undoubtedly played a crucial role in advancing gender equality, particularly through their victory in the Person's Case of 1929, recent scholarship and activism have brought to light the limitations, and even harms, of their activism, especially as it relates to issues of race, class, and colonialism. At the heart of this reassessment is the recognition that the Famous Five's work largely benefited a specific demographic: white, middle-class women. Their vision of equality, though groundbreaking in some ways, did not extend to all women. Indigenous women, Black women, and women of Asian descent were either ignored or actively marginalized in their struggle. These groups continued to face systemic discrimination long after the Person's Case, With little support from the mainstream women's movement at the time, this exclusion wasn't incidental, it was often baked into the strategies and beliefs of the famous five themselves. Emily Murphy, for example, is frequently cited as a pioneer for women's rights, but she also held and promoted deeply racist and eugenicist views. She was a leading voice in Canada's eugenics movement, which aimed to improve society by preventing people deemed unfit from reproducing. This ideology was inherently discriminatory, targeting immigrants, people with disabilities, the poor, and especially Indigenous peoples. Murphy's 1922 book The Black Candle, for instance, was a sensationalist and fear-mongering attack on drug use that conflated crime with race and helped fuel racist laws and policing practices. She described Chinese, Black, and Indigenous Canadians in openly dehumanizing terms, language that contributed to the criminalization and oppression of those communities. This raises a deeply uncomfortable, but necessary, question: how do we reconcile someone's significant contributions to justice with their simultaneous promotion of injustice? It's tempting to either completely villainize or entirely Leoneize historical figures, but the reality is more complex. A mature understanding of history requires that we hold both truths at once. The famous five did change the legal definition of personhood in Canada, and that change empowered generations of women to engage in public life. But they also upheld and perpetuated systems of racial exclusion that harmed others. Recognizing these flaws doesn't diminish their achievements, it provides context. It helps us see that progress is rarely perfect or inclusive at first. Often, rights are won in waves, with each generation expanding the circle of inclusion. By critically reassessing the famous five, we're not erasing them from history, we're enriching our understanding of it. We're shifting away from a simplistic hero narrative toward a more honest, nuanced account that acknowledges both the victories and the injustices. This cultural shift toward more inclusive historical storytelling reflects a broader movement in Canada and beyond. People are now asking, whose stories have been told? Whose have been left out? Statues and honors once unquestioned are now being re-evaluated. This doesn't mean tearing down history, but rather telling it more fully, so that we can learn not only what was achieved, but also what was overlooked and who was left behind. In doing so, we create space for more inclusive histories. We honor the fight for gender equality while also recognizing the ongoing struggles of Indigenous women, racialized women, and other marginalized groups who are still pushing against barriers the famous five never addressed. It reminds us that justice must be intersectional, aware of how race, gender, class, and colonialism intersect, if it is to be truly just for everyone. So yes, we can still remember and respect the famous five for what they accomplished, but we must also confront what they ignored or enabled. In doing so, we honor history not with blind admiration, but with clarity, humility, and a commitment to keep pushing the boundaries of justice further than they ever did. As the video concludes, viewers are reminded that while the person's case marked a turning point, the struggle for true equality continues. Legal personhood was just one step. Women, especially women of color, Indigenous women, LGBTQ+ women, and disabled women, still face systemic barriers. The voiceover offers a final reflection: the famous five changed the law, but the fight for justice is far from over. Viewers are invited to think critically and personally. Did you know about the person's case before today? How should we remember the famous five? The video ends with a call to action: like, comment, and subscribe to explore more stories from Canada's complex and evolving history, with suggested videos diving into the women's suffrage movement and the ongoing legal struggles of Indigenous women.